Hi everyone, welcome to this session of Campus Energy 2025. This session is 6A, Decarbonizing with District Energy, and it focuses on the University of California, Riverside's roadmap to central plant decarbonization. That's with me, Calum Thompson, and we also have Chad Sisco from UCR. Our outline today is really just to talk about the drivers of the study and what's the purpose of initiating this decarbonization study for UCR. We'll also then go into a existing conditions overview. What does the campus do? What's existing systems? And then I'll talk a bit more around the development process and analysis that was done to identify a preferred decarbonization pathway for UCR. Finally, we'll talk about what's happened since then and the plans moving forward. I'll hand over to Chad to get us started.
Thank you, Cal. Now, the purpose of this decarbonization study was to develop strategies to achieve at least 90% reduction in Scope 1 emissions. That was the main goal of this study. And it aligns with our existing UC Riverside plans, including the UCR strategic plan and the UCR long-range development plan. And the strategies focus on the elimination of natural gas, including fleet and refrigerant leakages, and other stationary diesel combustion emissions aren't included in this study. And also excluded was analysis of energy procurement and building level energy conservation. So next we'll go into the campus overview and give you a little bit of description about the campus. As of fall 2023, 26,000 students, so we're still growing. Our campus is broken up into mainly two parts. We call it East Campus and West Campus. The West Campus is mostly agricultural based. It's split somewhat evenly, 500 acres on the West Campus, but the focus is mainly on the East Campus, where our core buildings are, including our central plant and our satellite plant. Also wanted to mention we have a lot of housing located in the northeast portion of our campus, which is continually growing and will be our main growth in the next 10 to 15 years. Our infrastructure is centralized in three spots. University substation on the west portion of campus that provides all of our electricity to the core campus. Our steam plant is located right in the center of campus. We call it CUP, Central Utility Plant. And our satellite plant, which only produces chilled water, is located all the way on the east side of campus, located near our TES tanks, which are in the hills on the south side of campus. Our tanks are total 7 million gallons of capacity, a little over that. So I just wanted to point that out. Our electrical infrastructure is mainly located on the east side at our university substation in coordination with Riverside Public Utilities. And our housing on the north is served by a separate substation called Hunter Substation. Our main substation from Riverside Public Utilities has two feeds. However, it's still a single point of failure for UCR that we need to address in the future with our increased load coming online. Our steam infrastructure, the main point I want to bolster on this slide is that we have utility corridors located throughout the entire campus. As you can see in the picture, there's a highlighted portion of the utility corridors, and this was basically the stable of our analysis, in that we can reuse these tunnels to run our new hot water piping and remove the existing steam piping, which will help costs and alleviate disruptions to campus. Our chill water, we have two chill water production plants, one central plant and one satellite plant. Our satellite plant is the newest plant built in 2002, and it does 80% of our chilled water production. Our central plant does the other 20%. And we've been using TES for quite some time now, and it's helped a lot with our load reduction and demand reduction during on-peak times. And during our analysis, we found that this is going to help us dramatically when we incorporate new technologies such as heat recovery chillers and heat pump chillers. This study uses a baseline of 2019 utility consumption and emissions to evaluate the savings from our proposed pathways. But I wanted to point out that in our search for a 90% reduction in Scope 1 emissions, we found that natural gas makes up 90% of our Scope 1 emissions. So it made it quite easy to focus on our steam boilers to remove them to reduce our scope by 90%.
Thanks, Chad. Great summary there. So really that allows us to jump into the actual decarb planning process. And in trying to do that, the first step we've got to do is, as Chad mentioned, is really understand where your existing conditions today, which gives us a foundation for which to plan for the future. Now we know of UC system goals and how that applies to this campus. So really the considerations when where are you headed is around how does a long range development plan, changing climate conditions, etc., impact your demand for energy in the short, medium, and long term. To do that, we modeled the different iterations of the master plan to quantify the loads and the consumption in that future. With that future state, we then have what we need to solve, which is we need to mitigate X amount of carbon by X date. And to do that, we look at multiple different options to do so, improving the building, looking at infrastructure improvements and supply options. And what I'll talk a bit more about in the next few slides is what those options are and how do you implement them to be effective. Now, when we're looking at the technologies, they really fall into two major camps for decarbonisation. One is, can we maintain the existing use of steam and look at ways that we can produce that high temperature demand through either alternative fuels? That could be the continued use of natural gas with renewable natural gas offsets. It could be the direct use of alternative fuels such as hydrogen or local biogas. And we could use carbon capture to allow us to continue to use natural gas, or transition to an electric-based steam generation. You've got your electric boilers and emerging steam heat pump technologies. The big shift that you've seen a lot of campuses doing is this transition from steam to hot water to allow for a much more efficient supply options. And when we look at that, it's almost all exclusively heat pump based, moving heat from somewhere such as the air, another water source, or a geoloop to the buildings, essentially, through a combination of heat pumps and hot water infrastructure. But as we know, that would require a major transition of campus infrastructure. The way we looked at it initially, we did a two-phase evaluation approach. First, we had our big list with all these emerging technologies and different fuels, and we looked at it through the lens of maturity and market readiness. Is that technology ready, and is it available in Southern California? We looked at cost, operational and capital cost. And then in terms of the space and scale of the technology, how much space does it need? Can it produce capacity at the scale the UCR needs it? And then crucially, and this is where we got into a lot of interesting discussion, was what's the potential disruption? Can it be implemented effectively at UCR? And we did this preliminary traffic light analysis to help us identify which technology should stay, which ones should go. You'll see all the ones here that we continued on with our analysis, but we ruled out such things as deep geothermal wells because of the disruption and the high cost. We ruled out small nuclear reactors for similar reasons, as well as the risk in actually delivering something in the time frame, and a few other technologies were ruled out at that point too. And when we got to this short list, it allowed us to do a much more detailed analysis in the different options. I'm just highlighting one thing here, which is the really UCR's, I wouldn't say unique, but highly favorable conditions, a combination of relatively mild climate, slightly on the warmer side, but doesn't get too hot, doesn't get too cold. And 24/7 demand for heating and cooling. What that allowed us to do is essentially look at options which leverage simultaneous heating and cooling. And at UCR, we're looking at over 70% of that thermal demand being simultaneous. If we can move heat from the cooling network into the heating network, then we're not having to generate anything at all. And really that became a cornerstone of our technology options when it came to a hot water solution. We developed a number of different scenarios, in fact, 5 different scenarios, which we compared in detail against one another. Each of these scenarios is a different combination of what upgrades are required in the building. Does it require steam to hot water conversion? Does it require local generation, such as an air source heat pump? The distribution medium, steam, hot water, what temperature should it be? The configuration of supply equipment, which we talked about briefly, as well as the use of thermal energy storage. And finally, where would it go? Where would this infrastructure go on campus? Is there space for it? How would it work? And we evaluated each of those scenarios against the required criteria, obviously cost, life cycle cost, and emissions, but also how would we phase and minimize disruption of this technology as solution, and how do we consider equity and environmental justice, as well as the ability to leverage the solution for campus learning. The 5 scenarios we evaluated in detail were a transition from a steam central plant to a hot water central plant, and multiple subversions of that. The ability to do nodal central plants, so essentially break out districts of the campus and develop a solution for those. Scenario 3 is really looking at maintaining the steam network, but electrifying the central source of that through electric boilers or steam heat pumps. Scenario 4 is that alternative fuel option, again maintaining steam as the medium, and 5 is the complete decentralization of the thermal network, certainly the heating side, to locally generate it. Each one we did a detailed life cycle cost analysis, total cost of ownership model, as well as mapped out essentially where these systems would be placed and what they would look like, etc. Long story short, even the financial analysis kind of narrows us down to the scenario 1 option. It does make sense from the analysis for UCR to transition from a steam to hot water solution and do so efficiently. Again, that's a combination of extremely efficient and good conditions for efficient generation and great demand conditions which maximize simultaneous use. One that's also quite low there, you'll see S4.1. That is the continued use of renewable natural gas procurement to offset emissions. Now, while that can be a great bridge technology, there is certainly uncertainty about the price of renewable natural gas in the long term, and there's a certain financial risk associated with the do nothing scenario, essentially. But we evaluated that for comparison. I'll highlight here, this is a more detailed summary, but it shows you that we've highlighted scenario 1.2 of the scenario 1 options as the preferred scenario. Now it's slightly more expensive than scenario 1.1. The difference is that scenario 1.2 has a new thermal energy storage system on the heating side, which provides greater heating redundancy and fundamentally a higher resilience supply of heating, which the campus was excited about. So what does that look like? What does this option look like in terms of phasing? Now we know we need to get off steam in the buildings, but again, one of the good conditions at the campus currently is that only 11 buildings currently use steam within the building. The rest already have steam to hot water heat exchangers at their interface. So that means, looking at those buildings where there's existing steam, replacing the piping, the coils where appropriate, the process equipment where appropriate, such as the sterilizers, where the buildings have existing hot water, looking at the air handler units and etc. to expand the coil capacity to allow it to meet essentially 130 degrees supply temperature. And we're also decentralizing a lot of this process equipment to localized electrical implications, of which we also included the analysis of, so we could quantify the impact on the electrical infrastructure, because it's not insignificant to decentralize I don't know, something like 50 pieces of process equipment. And then the big shift, obviously, though, is how do you pull out the existing steam pipe and implement new hot water piping while minimizing disruption, requires a lot of temporary heat generation at buildings and a very clever phased approach. We identified 5 phases of transition with an optional additional pilot of in phase 1 to test out these technologies to look at how they work in practice. I'll cover this one relatively quickly, but there are 2 plants, as Chad mentioned. One is the satellite plant, one is the central mechanical plant, or the central steam plant, excuse me. The first step to enable this transition is to expand the cooling capacity of the satellite plant. That will allow the existing main central plant to remove and decommission its chillers, allowing space to be allocated for new water-to-water heat pumps, heat recovery chillers, which go in there. Then it starts simultaneously generating heating and cooling from the central plant. Finally, we'll be looking to add additional air source heat pumps outside and adjacent to the existing central plant, which can deal with the top-up heating requirements of the future system. Wanted to share this with you. Everyone's interested in costs and what the components are. I won't go into it in detail, but I will say that these changed a lot over the course of the effort, from preliminary costing, which uses kind of industry standard assumptions, which we've all used in multiple different projects in the past, but then applying them directly to UCR, we learned of multiple different additional costs and more assumptions we had to add in there, shall we say, to build up to this full $350 to $400 million project. It is a huge investment, but it covers, essentially represents a complete campus transition to a fully decarbonized heating system. I mentioned briefly the district phasing. This is flexible. It has to be flexible to accommodate inevitable changes, but this is one way in which the different districts can be phased over the design and implementation process, with some flexibility on the timing of when the central plant upgrades happen. What the phasing of the project allowed us to do was quantify in detail what we thought the investments were required over time. This is a investment or cost over time graph. You'll see the red line is the business as usual. So every year for the next 10, 15 years, it's cheaper to do the existing conditions as you invest in a new system. But soon, when recapitalization of the existing steam networks required and other upgrades, they start to become a lot closer. And in the long term, operationally, the system that's proposed would be cheaper on a yearly basis than what's currently in place. And its sister graphic, the impact on emissions, you'll see that implying it under this potential pathway allows the campus to achieve 90% scope 1 emissions reduction in 15 years. So I'll wrap up by just saying this was a super exciting project for us because of the kind of combination of factors technically, which make this a real opportunity to realize a decarbonized campus. It has that combination of environment and demand, which give this highly simultaneous thermal demand profile. There is a phasing pathway in place which can minimize disruption, and that's helped by the fact that UCR currently does not have like a hospital, a healthcare requirement, which a lot of the other UC campuses do have, allowing a little more flexibility in the phasing and minimizing the cost of disruption. It's the right time for UCR to invest. Their existing steam network is aging 70 years plus. This is the time to reinvest and mitigate essentially a lot of the capital investment required for just keeping it going. And finally, I say this is one of the few projects which really has a compelling financial case. Again, all those efficiency factors coming in. This is a campus where we really think that this could be not just the right thing for the environment, but the right thing for the system and the campus to continue with. I'll pass over to Chad to talk about a few things moving forward.
Yes, thank you, Cal. Quite a few lessons learned in this project, but to highlight the main ones is flexibility and cost. Our plan needed to be flexible to accommodate future changes in timing, scheduling, technologies, campus growth, and other factors. So the phasing plan needed to have flexibility, and it also the preferred pathways that we looked at needed to be supported by technical and financial analysis, other than let's just say that you needed to have some good support and background information for the technical and financial analysis of some of the preferred pathways, unlike unknowns such as micronuclear and other preferred pathways that we initially looked at, but couldn't be supported by some of the analysis and technical aspects that we would have liked to see. The other main factor is cost. The cost and the true cost of actually doing projects with UCs typically is higher than what you would normally see in the private industry. So we have to account for that in what we see normally in our projects, which can sometimes be difficult for certain things, but it definitely adds another layer of cost when you talk about UC projects. And moving forward, with our path down this decarbonization plan, since the study was completed, we've pivoted already from analyzing our steam plant chillers. We were looking to replace chillers 4 and 5 coming up because they're at the end of their life. But since then, we have now pivoted and we're focusing on expanding our satellite plant. If you can go to the next slide, Cal. And the focus on the satellite plant expansion will allow us to have the chillers at the steam plant live out their life before we have to replace them with our new technologies. Because as mentioned before, our satellite plant serves most of the chill water load, and an expansion at that plant would virtually allow that plant to handle the entire campus load while we convert the steam plant over to electrification. We've already started plans to convert 2 of the 11 buildings that Cal mentioned that have steam all the way to the air handlers. Those are currently in engineering design. And the main path forward and goal that we've like to highlight here is that our CFO and Vice Chancellor has issued his 20 goals for the next year, and 3 of them are specifically in support of decarbonization plan initiatives, which is great. The final path looking forward is financing, and that's going to be, I think, the question mark for everybody in this camp for UC, because as we know, the state budget isn't great at the time of this study, and we're looking for near-term pilot projects and also other funding pathways to help us fund this project moving forward.
All right.
And that's
Great.
it.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Too many